link, copy invitation. I just need the link. Oh, okay, that's fine. the other one too, so she might want to. Well, that's going to be a different. Maybe I should say disregard. I thought I knew a rag. That's weird. Oh, maybe it wasn't sent. Oh, good. That would be a good thing. Maybe I did it too fast. Ah, good. Okay, that's actually that's beneficial. Thank you, Lord. Thanks be to God. She's not here. Who's Baldino? Okay. Okay. And Brooks. Who's Cortazar? Cortazar, good. Is Dunstan and Eppheimer, Georgia, and Ms. Fusco. Okay. Ms. Gartner. There. Chris Cabbage. Okay. Because I know where you sit, so that's helping me. It's helping me. Ms. Kisner. Ms. Kratz. Ms. Kratz. Ms. Kratz here? No? Ms. Crawwinkle Peralta. Ms. I think I got her face in my head, but I don't see her. But Ms. Leonard? Jewel Leonard? No. Oh, well. All righty. Ms. I think so. No. Is Maciak? Avery? No. Apparently not. Margalis. Ms. Miller, no. There's no Miller anymore. Is Morgan, Isabel, Morgan, let's see, Isabel Morgan, Mr. Paniagua, where are they? Ms. Rentschler? Okay. I don't know why touching the mouse is making it move. Rentschler is Raya. Ms. Schwartztrauber. Shaw, Ms. Shaw. There's Ms. Shaw, okay. Shaw, Slacktish. Smith. Mr. Stolilsky. Ms. Bulch. Ms. Bulch, Mariah? Bulch? Here? No? No Wagner. Okay. Ms. Waits. There's Ms. Waits. And Mr. Deckert and Mr. Marino. Okay, good. Okay. As we are in Judaism, I have a little reading from one of their primary texts. I'm going to read from the book of Deuteronomy, the last book in those 5 books that I showed you last time, which comprise really the core of the Jewish scriptures. We'll get to that later in the future. The story of the Exodus. This is from Deuteronomy, where Moses basically, I'll tell you later about it, but it's very short and sweet. It's basically a repeat of the law that you find that comes before. Deuteronomy means the second law. And in the midst of this, Moses says to the people, "Ask now of the days of old, before your time, ever since God created humankind upon the earth. Ask from one end of the sky to the other, did anything so great ever happen before? Was it ever heard of? Did a people ever hear the voice of God speaking from the midst of fire as you did and live? Or did any God venture to go and take a nation for himself from the midst of another nation? By testings, by signs and wonders, by war, with strong hand and outstretched arm, and by great terrors, all of which the Lord your God did for you in Egypt before your very eyes. All this you were allowed to see, that you might know that the Lord is God, there is no other. Out of the heavens he let you hear his voice to discipline you. On earth he let you see his great fire, and you heard him speaking out of the fire. For love of your ancestors, he chose their descendants after them, and by his presence and great power led you out of Egypt, dispossessing before you nations greater and mightier than you, so as to bring you in and to give you their land to you as a heritage, as it is today. This is why you must now acknowledge and fix in your heart that the Lord is God in the heavens above and on the earth below, and that there is no other. And you must keep his statutes and commandments, which I, meaning Moses, command you today, that you and your children after you may prosper, and that you may have long life on the land which the Lord your God is giving you forever." And so, yes, holy God, I give you praise and thank you for having revealed yourself to the sons and daughters of Israel. And I pray your blessings upon them, that you may grant them peace. And as I am not a Jew, but I believe in their Messiah, I thank you, Lord, that through them you have sent us Jesus, your Son, who is the Christ, and in whose name I pray. Amen. Holy Spirit. That kind of encapsulates those two ideas I told you about, yes? Monotheism, you have one God, and there is one God, but at this point, it's enough to say you have one God for these people. And you are specially chosen, you are elected, election, okay? So we'll remember that, because we'll come back to that when we talk about Jewish beliefs later on. Now, Ms. Smith mentioned something to me, and I want to give her credit for that, and I want to make this clarification. Actually, two things I'm going to mention. Ms. Smith was talking about the reflection paper. I would, for the reflection paper, there are two different questions, yes? One has to do with Hinduism and one has to do with Judaism. You are to answer them both. They are not optional, okay? Because I want both religions covered. We talked about both. So that should be a clarification for you. You answer both questions. The second thing is I would strongly recommend, if you want to start writing the paper early, that's certainly fine. But I think you might also benefit if you waited a little bit. Certainly now that we've done Hinduism, you can answer the question on Hinduism, I hope, better than you would have. But wait a little bit on Judaism, because I'm asking you one of the readings from the Mishneh Torah regards the Messiah and who is the Messiah, and how do we tell the Messiah. It's a rabbinical discussion about how do we tell and stuff like that. So some of the ideas that we're talking about in Judaism might help you write a better paper down the line. Okay, don't wait too long if you want to get it done, but if you want to start early, that's fine, but you might want to do just a rough draft and plug some stuff in later as more information is given to you. And of course, there's stuff in the textbook if you want to read ahead. That's the first thing. The second thing, what is the second thing? What was the second thing? The first thing was what Ms. Smith brought up about the, maybe I'll finish. I'll come back to the second thing. Well, the second thing that has just arisen in my mind now is, as you know, unless you have a student accommodation, you are not permitted to use computers in class. So I'd appreciate it if the computers are closed, unless, of course, you have a disability accommodation. Closed and put away, please. Thank you. Yes, miss.
Can you put your mask on?
Indeed. Thank you, miss. Almost forgot. All righty. Thank you very much. I will not comment on the fact that some of you are wearing cloth masks, which is another issue as well, right? Anyways, moving on to Judaism. I finished with the Exodus. And continuing, well, this is another, it's an old PowerPoint, so some of the stuff is repetitive. I understand that, but don't worry about it. Just go with it. After Moses and the Exodus, once the Jews enter back into the land of Canaan, they decide they want kings. There's a period of time, of course, I'm collapsing a lot and I have to simplify a lot, but they want to be like the other nations, and they establish their own kingdom, their own independent kingdom, which historians call the United Monarchy, the United Monarchy. It also is sometimes called the United Kingdom. Just thought about, not to be confused with Great Britain, of course, which is all, but the United Monarchy, which was in existence from 1040, around 1040 until 920. Okay. Out of the kings, there were several kings of this United Monarchy, but the greatest of those kings is David. He was not the first of those kings, but he is considered the greatest, the paradigm for Jewish kingship. He made Jerusalem the capital of his kingdom. Jerusalem, which is here, it's a little map I made. It's the capital of Jerusalem here. This is the extent, these are like the borders of that kingdom, and Jerusalem is there. He made Jerusalem the center. Let me just check and see if... Okay, good. Make sure it's recording. Just make sure I'm not on mute. Excellent. Okay. He made Jerusalem the capital. He defeated and neutralized the surrounding enemies. So he established a stable kingdom. He defeated any enemies that might have been in the surrounding area. And he established plans to build a temple, a house of worship to the God of the Jews that they worship. He made plans. He actually did not do that. He died before that happened. And it was left to his son Solomon, who's the one who actually does build the temple. Let me write that down because it's not in the PowerPoint, just so you know. His son Solomon, well, I should say one of his sons, not his only son, but it is Solomon who actually builds the temple, though David wants to. And what happens? Why is it yellow here and red there? Because the United Kingdom, the United Monarchy of Israel, eventually separates. There are disagreements, and the North separates off, and basically they elect or they choose their own king, and the South continues on. The South continues on. The North is called Israel and Judah. Now, I think I talked about this before near the beginning of the course, so I don't feel the need to repeat a lot of it. You should remember it. It should be in your notes. But just to again recap, there was this separation. The divided kingdom of Israel and Judah. Remember that Israel is the north and Judah is called the south. But they are all Israelites. They're all Jews. In 922, and I have to tell you that because the next important date, a very important date for the history of the Jews and for their self-understanding, is that in 922, they separate, if you want the exact date, I give the 920, so it's 922 BC is the traditional date. But in 721, the northern part, I might have already told you this already, but the northern part is invaded by an empire in the north, Syria. And they come down, it's called, in the ancient world, they're called the Assyrians, but it's modern day Syria. You see the country of Syria, okay, same region. There's a reason why it's called Syria, because of this ancient empire, this ancient group of people called the Assyrians. They come down from the north. Well, everyone kind of comes down from the north because the rest of this is desert. So they're not traveling over the desert. They go up and come down. But the Assyrians come down from the north, and they destroy in 721. They invade and conquer the kingdom of Israel, and so that ends. And they deport all the people, or I shouldn't say all the people, but they deport many of the people from there to who knows where. So those northern tribes of Jews are lost to history. We don't know where they went, but their descendants are still there. Their descendants are still there. These people who are called Samaritans. Samaritans. When the Assyrians invade Israel, the northern kingdom, they send their own people. You know, they deport and exile a lot of the people, usually the upper classes. Poor people never have anything that anyone wants. So they leave the poor people alone, you know, peasant farmers. But, you know, the upper classes, the landowners, they usually exile them away. And they send their own people in to populate the area. And there was a kind of a mixture of the people. The people and their culture got mixed in with the group of Jews that were still living there, to the point that they're not considered Jews anymore. They do have the religion of the Jews, the Samaritans. They worship the God of Israel. They even have the same scriptures. The 5 books that I showed you, the first 5 books, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. But that's all they accept. They don't accept any later writings. They only accept the essential core basis of the Hebrew script, of the Jewish scriptures. And they have their own temple, and that's what the guy is holding up there. The first 5 books of the Bible. So they have them as their only scripture. They're here on Mount Gerizim in Israel, modern day Israel, where their temple used to be. They had their own temple where they worship the God of Israel, and they still go there to celebrate Passover every year. So religiously, they're Jews. I mean, but ethnically they're not, because of this admixture with the Assyrian element way back when. Last I checked, from statistics, there are only about 1,000 of them in existence. So not very many, and the number seems to be dropping. But they are still there. So the remnant of this historical event, the invasion of the Northern Kingdom in 721, and its destruction in 721, these people are still there. They're still here, I should say. They haven't gone away. That's 721 BC. The Southern Kingdom continues on until 587. In 587, and is that the next? Yes, in 587. Actually, I'll leave that map because, again, I'm going to show it to you. Again, another empire called the Babylonians comes from the north. The Babylonian Empire, Babylon, Babylonia. It's called Babylon, it's called Babylonia, so here we go. And in 587, I know this is on the PowerPoint, but I want to make it clear. They come and they invade and destroy the Southern Kingdom. So the time of the Jewish kingdoms ends with that, into a new historical period called the Babylonian exile, because the Babylonians do exactly what the Assyrians did. They exile the upper classes, the people of importance, and take them off. Many of them to Babylon, which is a modern day Iraq. The Assyrians, we don't know where the people went. We have no clue where these people went after the Assyrian invasion. But with the Babylonian exile, we know that many Jews were exiled to modern day Iraq and were living there for a period of time, 587 to 539. So they're exiled from their homeland. The Babylonians destroyed the temple that Solomon built So now the Jews have no temple to offer their sacrifices. They have no way of fulfilling the many sacrificial and ritual laws, many of them that have to do with the temple sacrifice and center around the temple. They have no way of fulfilling them anymore because the temple is no more. It's been burned and destroyed. So many of the religious regulations for living in the land of Israel become a dead letter, or they're impossible to observe. And so there's a void, and a void needs to be filled with something. And one of the things that arises during the time of the exile to fill this religious void is the synagogue. The synagogue. Synagogue is simply a Greek word which means coming together. It's not a Hebrew word even. It's a Greek word which means to come together. An assembly. People come together. This class is a synagogue in a manner of speaking. Okay. So this system develops where you have these places where Jews can assemble together, they can worship together, but they can also be places for intensive education in and study of their laws, their religious laws. So that helps continue, even though the sacrificial elements can't be continued, you can still study the rules and regulations and try to figure out, how do we live them now without a temple in a faraway land? We're not even in our homeland anymore. So the synagogue becomes an educational institution and helps continue the Jewish religion, keeps it alive amongst them. Eventually, the Jews are allowed to go home. Babylon is an empire. Empires come and go. Come and go. And as Americans, we need to remember that. That's just, there's no empire as great as it has been, any of the great empires in the world, that is still in existence. The Romans are gone. Qin dynasty's gone. Alexander the Great, gone. British Raj, the British Empire, pretty much gone. They have a few islands, but empires come and go, and the Babylonians themselves are invaded and destroyed. And the Jews are allowed, many of the Jews are allowed to return home. Not all the Jews do, but many Jews do return back to the land of Israel. They rebuild the temple. Once they come back and they set everything in order, they begin the process of rebuilding the destroyed temple and reinstituting the priestly sacrifices. And hence, scholars call this period of Jewish history the Second Temple period. Why second? Just like Vatican II. Why the Second Vatican Council? Because there was a first. There was a first temple, the Temple of Solomon. Now there's a second temple. So the Second Temple period. And that stretches a long, long time. You see, from 530 BC, around that time when the Jews start coming back, and right into AD, the time of Jesus and the so-called Christian or Common Era, 70 AD. I should probably say that as well. Well, yeah, I should say that as well. Let me backtrack 1 second, because I just looked at my notes and I do want to mention something before moving on to the Second Temple period itself. I mentioned the synagogue. There are two other things, two other developments in the exile that should be mentioned. Okay, and times overlap. So things start to get going in the exile, and they receive further development in the Second Temple period, and even during the time of Jesus, they're still in development, as we'll see. But synagogue, the other thing is monotheism, which is not on the PowerPoint. So let me just write it down so it's the synagogue, monotheism. And it's not there because I already defined it, the belief in one God. That, because the Jews are living in such a foreign environment, around such foreign religions, and they want to keep their identity, there is this great stress now pressed on the fact that there is one God only. It's not just that this is the only God that we worship, okay, who has a special relationship with us, but there is only one God. So the monotheist idea kind of crystallizes into what we might call a strict, or sometimes called an ethical monotheism. It's not just that there's one God and we kind of leave the question of other gods question mark, an open question. No, now we know there is one God. Think of the letter of Jeremiah that we read before. So monotheism is seen in the exile, where Judaism really starts to reflect on what it means to have only one God. And it's not just that he's our God, but he's the only God. The other thing that starts to develop, and just for convenience sake, I'll call it the Bible. All those oral traditions about the ancestors that I mentioned, the laws that Moses gives to the people, the story of the Exodus and stuff like that, that all starts to be collected around the time of the exile and this later time in the Second Temple period. They had been there before as an historical memory, but there are indications that it was in the exile especially and later that we start finding the Jewish Bible coming into existence, especially around those core writings of Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, the 5 books, sometimes called the 5 books of Moses, although it's probably likely he didn't write it all. But those 5 books, everyone agrees on that. The Jews are very in agreement on that. But the traditions start to be collected, edited, and written down. There also are some indications that maybe some of the prophetic writings, the writings of these people, these visionaries called prophets, who lived before, some of their traditions and their predictions and their prophecies get written down and collected as well. And that's probably about all we can say at that time. But the ball starts to get rolling into the Second Temple period. The important person to remember from this period, the Second Temple period, is a man called Ezra, who is a religious authority. He's one of these people. You have the synagogue system. It's a place of teaching and education. And you have these people who develop called scribes, who are teachers and religious experts. Okay, they're kind of like guardians of the tradition. They know the Jewish law, they know the traditions and interpretations, and they are able to interpret them for people and give decisions about them. Kind of like what will later be called a rabbi, but not exactly apparently the same. You can maybe say it's a proto-rabbi, a first rabbi. But Ezra the scribe, and we don't have his exact dates when he lived. We know it was, after the exile, because he was allowed to go back. He went back to the land of Israel. But he flourished, flourished, which means he lived around about, we don't know his birth or death date, but he lived and flourished around between 465 and 359 BC. And Jews consider him as the father of Judaism, as the father of the religion that we come to start calling Judaism. So who was he? He was a priest, who was a scribe, as I've mentioned, from Babylon, who returns to the land of Israel, which is in desolation because of the exile and the time of the invasion. And why does he go back? He goes back to reinstate the observance of the law of Moses that God had given to the Jews, to help in rebuilding the sacred city of Jerusalem, to rebuild the temple so that they could have the sacrifices. He is believed to have been one of the founders, or if not the founder, of a council of religious experts who could give legal opinions to Jews throughout the world. Not all Jews were living in the land of Israel, as today. We know that not all Jews live in Israel. So you have this council called the Sanhedrin. In his case, it's called the Great Sanhedrin, that Ezra founds so that you can have all these religious experts get together and discuss and debate and talk about how to live the laws as a Jew and give official decisions for Jews throughout the world. And Jews could send their questions into this council and ask for opinions. Like, we don't have palm trees, so how do we celebrate, the Feast of Booths, where you need branches of palm to celebrate it? What do we do, rabbis? Well, ask the Great Sanhedrin. Ask them for a decision, a response. So Ezra is seen as the founder of that great Sanhedrin. And so we have this quotation from this work called the Tosefta Sanhedrin. Doesn't matter what the Tosefta Sanhedrin is, but in this quote it says, Ezra was worthy for the Torah to have been given to him had not Moses come before him. So basically what it's saying is, if Moses had not come, Ezra would have been given the Torah, would have been given the law by God on Mount Sinai, you know. He would have been given the 10 commandments and the laws because he was so worthy. He was such a great figure after Moses. He is our father, the father of Judaism. It is during this period as well, the Second Temple period, that there's an idea that starts developing based on the previous kingdom, the monarchy, that people always seem to want to restore, seem to want to bring back. And there's this idea that the king will come back, will have a descendant of David return in sometime in the future, who will fight a war, defeat all the enemies of Israel, and reestablish the kingdom that David once had, this great king had. And this descendant of David is called the Anointed One. He's the Anointed One. The one who, to anoint means to have oil poured on your head. That's all it means, okay? I forget what they call it in the medical profession. There's a word. Well, I don't remember it right now. Maybe it'll come to me. Anyways, to anoint someone, to put oil on them. And that was part of the process of making one a king, not just a king. There are other professions that had that ritual as well, but it's part of the ritual of making someone or identifying someone as the monarch, that you would pour oil over the person's head. So you're anointed. Messiah, that's what the word Messiah means. In English, it means one who has had oil poured over his head and made a king, an anointed one. So this idea of a descendant of David, hence a king like David, would come back to restore Israel's old kingdom and establish a reign of peace for Jews based on the observance of the law. There's a religious element here. It's not just a political element of, killing all of those people who are trying to kill us, our enemies, and establishing peaceful borders so that we can just live. It's more than just that. The Messiah is also not just a political figure, but is seen as a religious figure. He will reestablish the proper and faithful observance of the law of Moses, the religious laws of Judaism. One of the reasons that, for example, Jesus of Nazareth is not accepted as the Messiah by many, well, I shouldn't say many Jews. Well, there are Jews for Jesus. But the reason that Jesus is not accepted as the Messiah in Judaism is because he did not fulfill this for Jews. He did not restore the proper observance of the law of Moses amongst Jews. He did other things, but he didn't do that. So he's not seen as fitting the bill in a way, fulfilling the prophecy. And there he is, Jesus of Nazareth. I can't talk about Judaism without mentioning him. He has to be mentioned because, number one, he was a Jew. He was a Jew. He was a Jew. He was a Jew. And I'll say it 100 more times if I could, 1,000,000 times if I could. Why? Because people think he's Jesus, the Christianity. No, Jesus was not a Christian. He wasn't a Catholic. I remember I saw this book written by some, kind of, I guess, rightish Catholic group, right of center, and this picture of, Jesus, what someone thought Jesus looked like, and the title, I remember, Jesus Christ Catholic. I'm like, okay, yeah, all right, fine, yeah, okay, yeah. No. In the first hand, which we'll learn in Christianity, you can't really call the founder of a religion like the religion. Jesus, founded Christianity. He was not a Christian per se, but he is important. You have this person called Jesus of Nazareth who appears during the Second Temple period. You can see his dates. I'll go over his dates later when we do Christianity, but there they are. He's a first-century Jew who starts a reform movement within Judaism. Did it have political overtones? I don't know. Some scholars think yes. They think that's what got him killed. The Romans thought he was claiming to be the Messiah, this king of the Jews. And so, off, away with Jesus, let's get rid of this guy. The Romans were very brutal. They didn't wait. If someone challenged their power, the person would be gone. But we'll talk about him more in Christianity. The next two major events in this time period that we need to talk about are, again, very significant for the Jews, immensely significant, as we'll see why, is this event called the First Roman War, Jewish-Roman War. And then the second one, there's another Jewish-Roman war called the Bar Kokhba Revolt, which I'll talk about after this. But in the year 66, the Jews revolt. The Jews had been, since the time of the end of the monarchy, the Jews had been under the control of various other empires and rulers ever since then. They really, for a very brief period, they had some independence, but for the most part, first, they were under the control, the Babylonians. Then the Babylonians were defeated by the Persians, modern day Iran. The Persians were eventually defeated by the Greeks. And then the Greeks were defeated by the Romans, or at least the Roman. When I say defeated, in some cases it wasn't like an actual defeat. In some cases it was just like the previous empire kind of started crumbling and another superpower came in and filled the void, and that was the Romans. So they were the ones who were in power when Jesus was crucified, and they were in power during this revolt. Why? Why did it happen? Well, the Jews have been under direct Roman occupation since 63 BC, actually. 63 BC. That's when the Roman general Pompey, his name is Pompey. I just do it because I think it's just such a cool name. I don't know why. It's like Pompey, baby, The name I want to give one of my kids. Pompey Dunn. 63 BC, Pompey invaded the country and attacked Jerusalem and basically took over power for the most part. Okay, they allowed some Jewish rule through a puppet king, but I'm not going to go into that. But I probably should mention them, but I'm not going to mention them. But yeah, they took over power. That's all you need to know, and control of the area. So there was this long period of antagonism. The Jews felt they were oppressed. They were under non-Jewish rulers with their religious beliefs that were often in conflict with the Jews' beliefs. And the Jews felt that their religious beliefs were not respected by the Romans. And eventually it all kind of came to a head. There was one straw on the camel's back too many, and just a revolt started happening in 66 AD. And the Jews pushed out the Romans for a short period of time, but the Romans came back and they were bigger and stronger. And so what happened? 70 AD, the Romans come back and they basically annihilate the Jewish opposition. They attack Jerusalem. They completely destroy the Second Temple in 70 AD, and that is a great tragedy for the Jews because it has never been rebuilt. It was destroyed in 70, and unlike the previous one, was no opportunity even now to rebuild it. And in fact, the Jews have a whole feast day. It's not a celebratory one, where they remember the anniversary of the destruction of both temples, but especially the one in 70. And that destruction, again, maybe more so than the Babylonian destruction, caused a need to reevaluate and consolidate the religion, because again, you didn't have the temple, you didn't have a place where you could offer the sacrifices, and it was such a center of Jewish religion. The question was, what are you going to do? Well, how do we practice our religion? And so the Jews had to respond to that disaster by calling a council called the Council of Jamnia, And this leads us into two periods. I'm kind of collapsing these two, well, not kind of, I am collapsing these two periods called the Late Classic in the Middle Ages, which start with the destruction of the temple in 70 AD and go to the beginning of the modern period in 1517. Where was Jamnia? Modern day Israel, but just so I can show you. Yeah, I gotta open up a new tab to get to it. There we go. The Near East, Israel. Okay, let's go a little bit farther. Here we go. The modern country of Israel. And it's basically up here. Tel Aviv, remember Tel Aviv used to be, well, Tel Aviv is officially the capital, but they do want the capital in Jerusalem, but that's officially the capital of the modern nation of Israel. And in this region just below Tel Aviv, in this region below, is where the ancient city of Jamnia was. And so they met. It's not on the coastline. It's a little bit in, I believe, at least from the maps I could see, a little bit in from the coastline. So the rabbis, the religious leaders that are remaining after this destruction, the ones that weren't killed by the Romans or didn't flee, come together at the Council of Jamnia around 70 AD. I mean, obviously after 70 AD, I should say. But that's a traditional dating. Some scholars don't even think the Council of Jamnia actually even happened. They think it's a legend. But there's no reason to doubt that it did. So sometime at the end of the 1st century AD, the beginning of the 2nd century. So let's say from 70 and after until maybe 110, 120 AD, somehow there was this meeting of rabbis to consolidate the Jewish religion in the face of their destruction. So Jewish laws, this is the period where the oral law and Jewish laws and legal interpretations get collected and published. And the person who does that is this great figure known as Judah HaNasi. Judah HaNasi. Nasi in Hebrew means a prince. Ha means the. Hebrew has a definite article, ha. Not all languages do, like Ukrainian or Polish. So his name is Yehuda HaNasi, or Judah, as he's more commonly called, Judah HaNasi, Judah the Prince. And he's an ancient figure, so you see the date. We don't know exactly when he lived. Sometime in the late 2nd century, which would be in the 100s AD. So sometime around 180 AD. 170, 180, 190 AD. So the late 2nd century is when he's believed to have existed, flourished, one might say. My place in my notes. Why can't I find his name? There it is. And he is the one who is given credit for collecting all of these oral traditions, because in Judaism, and we'll talk more about this when we get to the scriptures, in Judaism, it's not just about a book, okay? And again, we live in America, which is very, very much influenced by Christianity, but also America from its history, even though it's not totally true given our history. But at least for America, a lot of Americans are of the Protestant persuasion. We're very much not just Christian nation in our influences, but very Protestant Christian, even though Catholics and have been around even before Protestant Christians got here, but just the way it is. And so people think of the book, they think of the Bible and the book, and you follow the book because Protestants are basically scripture alone is the authority. That's never been the case for Judaism. The Jews believe that when Moses went up the mountain to meet with God wrote down the 10 Commandments and gave him the 10 Commandments, but God revealed the complete law to him, not just the law as written down in the scriptures, the sacred writings, but all the oral interpretation of that law. So there's like two streams that are really one stream. There's and Jews don't see the difference between the scriptures, the law as it's written down in Hebrew in their Bible, you might say, and this oral tradition, which is passed down by word of mouth and not written down until we get to Judah HaNasi. And that's what makes him so important. He collects these ancient oral interpretations for how to observe the law and the ways that the Jews are supposed to observe the law. And now they're there. And now the process begins of commenting on them and how to interpret them and apply them in a new way. Now that we're post-temple. And Judaism has to respond. So here's where the scribe, it seems to me, this kind of religious expert who kind of a teacher, becomes more of the religious expert and the position that we know of today, a rabbi, my master. That's all it means, Rab, in the language of Aramaic. It's not Hebrew, it's a related language, Aramaic. Rab means great, great. And Rabbi, in the Semitic languages, you actually add personal possessive on the end of a word. So it's like saying book my or coffee my, Don't touch coffee my, ever. Well, you can have a sip if you want to, but that might be a little gross. Right? So Rab, great, my great one, my master. So the scribe, who is like a teacher, now becomes truly a religious expert, okay? The rabbi, this person who is formally now trained, not just in Torah, the law of Moses, but also the oral traditions that are based on the law of Moses and center around the law of Moses, okay? So that develops during this time after the destruction of the temple. A hop, skip, and a jump later, we get, a few centuries later, we get to two important dates in the history of Judaism, although they do relate to other religions. In 313 AD or CE, depending on how you want to date things, the Roman emperor, the Romans who are oppressing them, becomes a Christian. Why is that important? Because isn't Christianity a separate religion? Yes, it is. At that time, it became such, but it is one of the offshoots of Judaism. It comes out of the Jewish religion. Jesus is a Jew. So now you have this pagan person, a Gentile, who just happens to be the Roman emperor, worshiping a man who claimed to be the Messiah of the Jews. How'd that go? You would have thought, if you're a Jew, like, thank you, Lord. Now we'll get some respect, because we're paisan, baby, right? You're a Christian. You worship our Jesus. You read our scriptures. You love Abraham too. You love Moses. The apostles were Jewish. The Blessed Mother was Jewish. Hey. The Christians are like, you don't accept the Christ. So things don't actually get better for the Jews amongst the Roman Empire. In fact, they get worse after Christianity is able to assert its authority over the Roman Empire. We have another development about 300 years later, as you might see. Islam. This man, Muhammad ibn Abdullah, okay, who claims to have a revelation. Well, I shouldn't say it's a revelation. It is a revelation, but it's not a revelation in the same way, as we'll find out when we talk about Islam. But I'll say revelation for now, for simplicity's sake. From what he believes is the God of the Jews, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. In fact, he believes that his people are descended from Ishmael, one of the sons of Abraham. And he founds this religion. He brings his own people who worship all sorts of other gods to the worship of the God of Israel. And he writes a book about the revelation that he's been given. Muslims wouldn't say he writes the book. God gives it to him. But okay, we'll learn that later. But he produces this book. The book mentions Abraham, it mentions Moses, it mentions Jesus, it mentions the Blessed Mother. You think things would go well for the Jews? No. No, why? Why, when the Muslims arrive on the scene and start conquering the areas of like Palestine and places where the Jews are living in Iraq and places like that, why do things not go well? Well, kind of the same issue. You Jews don't accept Muhammad as the prophet. You don't take him, you don't recognize him as your ultimate religious authority. So the Jews do fare, typically the Jews in the Jewish community did better amongst Muslims than they did amongst Christians. I mean, the Muslims were still oppressive of the Jews, but as with other groups, they treated Christians, didn't treat Christians as equal citizens either. But, you know, the Jews were generally not being killed as they seem to have been with some regularity in Christian Europe. Not always, but enough to take note of. So it was a little bit of a better situation sociologically for having a life. If you were a Jew, you certainly wanted to live under a Muslim ruler than a Christian king or prince. But okay, so two religions that seem to derive, well, not seem to, they derive their origins from this religion, and yet things aren't getting better. Things don't get better. In the Middle Ages, the Middle Age period, the 7th century until the 11th century, well, I mean, it goes longer than that, we have academics appear, who are these people who are called academics. There's a specific Hebrew term for them, but I'm not going to give it to you. It's not relevant right now. But you have two centers of learning for the Jews. Both of them are located in Iraq. Iraq, baby. Where, of course, Jews had stayed during the exile. Some Jews did not come back to the land of Israel. And so you have these academics who are very intensely studying the Jewish law, not just the written law, but also the oral law. And under these academics, we start finding these big collections of Jewish legal opinions appearing. These large collections of opinions and interpretations that will later be collected and organized during this period of the academics, the age of the academics. This collection that comes together is generally called Talmud, and it's very, very important. I mean, if you're a Jew, you don't just study Torah, law, in the Bible, the first 5 books of the Bible, but you also have to be committed to studying Talmud, this huge body of opinions that were collected by these academics. And we'll talk about Talmud later, so I'll move on. Now, how did that get there? Out of order. Sorry, I put the PowerPoint slides out of order. Sorry about that. Whoa, wait. In the 1500s, you'll see, 1517, if I remember correctly, that's the dating of the modern period historically for Western Europe, not just Judaism, but usually historians, and I believe you can confirm this if you're taking a history course, you can ask someone in the history department. This man, Martin Luther, a German priest, started to question the authority of the popes of Rome and their status within Christianity. And there's also their status as political rulers within Europe. And one thing led to another, and this whole reform movement started within the Western Christian church. And that's where Protestantism comes from. But we'll learn more about that, a little bit more about that in Christianity. Nevertheless, that action, but he did actually on Halloween Day, so it's easy to remember the date, October 31st. He didn't know it was Halloween for us, but it now is. Halloween, 1517, he started this, it's seen as the start of this movement, and it's seen as also the start of the modern period, the times where you start moving away from monarchies and principalities and duchies into the modern idea of the nation state, the nation of people. But that's a whole other cup of coffee. So the modern period. In the modern period, we find around the 1600s, starting around the 1600s, and gaining traction after that in the 1700s and especially in the 1800s, we have this period which historians call the Enlightenment. The Enlightenment. the time of light. Okay? Light from what? Well, from dark. So the previous centuries are called Dark Ages, right? Probably you've heard of that. If anyone's ever seen Monty Python's The Holy Grail. No? Yes? Anybody? Pie Jesu Domine. Actually, I should do it right. Pie Jesu Domine. Dona Requiem. You remember that? It's the scene. A bunch of monks would go around and they'd have, they'd hit themselves in the head as they're praying. It's funny because it's not exactly untrue, even though that monks did crazy practices like that. The Dark Ages, the time when there was no logic, people didn't think rationally, which they did if you ever do the history of the Dark Ages. But nevertheless, they were not, the period before the modern period was not known for its high scientific flights. So we have this thing happen in the 1600s, especially in Europe, especially in England. There's this emphasis on not appealing to religious authority, not appealing to tradition to base our lives on, or our discussions or our decisions, but basing it simply on rational thought, and also the testing of that rational thought through, experimentation and verification. So modern science, we're approaching that. So this is seen as a new thing. People feel like they're enlightened, like there was darkness before because people weren't doing that, and it's now light because people have seen the light. And they get results. I mean, there's no denying the results. I mean, the COVID vaccine. We're not, I'm not denigrating this in any way, but it's not like, yes, you can go to the chapel over in Mercy Hall, and maybe if you want to burn a candle to Saint, Joannicius the Great to keep you safe from, Omicron, you can, but you also can be tested and you can receive a vaccine and a booster. And that is modern science. There are benefits to that. I'm not saying there are not benefits to the religious response as well, but that kind of shows you the difference that happened in the Enlightenment. People weren't looking to religion or tradition anymore, human tradition. You use human reason. So there was this emphasis on using reason for knowledge. There were also new discoveries and exploration. 1492, Europeans discovered for themselves, certainly not for the natives who were there, but Europeans discovered that there were two huge continents on the other side of the Atlantic Ocean. Believe it or not, if I remember correctly, Australia, the whole continent of Australia wasn't discovered until the 1700s. Just stumbled upon this immense continent, the size of the contiguous 48 United States, right? It's huge, hardly populated. But I think the Dutch stumbled upon it, and they called it the Great Desert, and they just went away. We don't want this. This is all a desert, So they left. New Zealand wasn't discovered even later. So this age of exploration, discovering places and new contacts with North America, South America, Asia. They knew Asia was there, but there was this new contact through exploration with places like India. As I told you, there were European colonies in India. So they were getting that knowledge. And there was the triumph of modern science. People were seeing, again, not to denigrate religious practices, but people saw that there was an immediate effect to going to a doctor and getting an operation for some serious thing, an appendectomy. It's removed, it's done, your wound is cleansed, you're healed, and you go on with your life, rather than going to a shaman or a priest and having prayers said over you. I mean, I'm not saying that that's a bad thing, but it didn't seem to be that you couldn't argue with the results. One person was alive, and one person some people may have been alive, but there also might have been a lot of mortality. So we're a significant amount, or we're dying by going to the shaman rather than going to the physician. But that's not always been the case. In the ancient world, it was just as dangerous to be a physician, especially if your patient went south on you. What did you do to her? people started asking, what does it mean to be a Jew? And not just Jews. This happened in Christianity. I don't think so much in Islam, but just because I haven't encountered it enough, I'd have to ask how Islam encountered the Enlightenment. But certainly Christians as well were asking this question. But the focus here is on Judaism. Their experience of the Enlightenment in Europe caused them to ask, what does it mean to be a Jew in light of these things? Is it still relevant? What's the point of adhering to pre-modern customs of life? These things were given to us thousands and thousands of years ago. I shouldn't say thousands and thousands, but over 1,000 years ago. Oh, I should say thousands and thousands, 2,000. A long, long time ago, by tribes who didn't know that the earth went around a star, that this star was located in a galaxy. I've heard these things from people like the new atheists, like Christopher Hitchens, who's now dead, may he rest in peace. But you sometimes hear these things. Well, they didn't know anything about the world. They didn't know how the world worked. So why should we follow these customs? How they tell women to act, for example. What to do to people who are on the outside, like homosexuals, kill them or something. In the law, or lepers, people with diseases, keep them outside the community on the outskirts. These ideas didn't seem to jibe with the Enlightenment, these modern insights that people were getting. So how to be a Jew. So the Haskalah, that's the Hebrew term that Jews, sometimes you hear Jews refer to this, they won't call it the Enlightenment, but this is their word for this experience that Jews were having and encountering this. How to respond? Well, some Jews said, accept it. Hallelujah, which is Hebrew for praise the Lord or praise God. Yeah, accept it. Get with it, baby. We're in the 1880s, not the 1080s. BC. So we don't need to sacrifice goats anymore to some Middle Eastern god. Okay, we don't need to cut off the foreskin of the penis of our male children. In fact, some might say, you shouldn't do that. That's violence. What are you doing that for? And so you have the response of acceptance, which becomes Reform Judaism, what they call as Reform Judaism. So they stop teaching their kids Hebrew. They stop using Hebrew in the synagogue. They still have synagogues. They still have worship. They're not atheists. They still believe in God. But they don't need to, use Hebrew. What's the point? They didn't speak it. It was just a ritual language at the time. So it's much like using Latin at the Mass for Catholics, which actually, by the way, is still the standard language for the Mass. And Catholics are supposed to know how to give the responses in Latin. It's from Vatican II. At last I checked, I don't remember a priest who actually sat down in the congregation and taught them that. Wonder why. It's been 60 or 70 years in Vatican II. Maybe they'll get to it eventually. But Hebrew was a dead language, so why use it? Circumcision, why do it? You don't need to do it. And the Bible, we don't take this literally anymore. They weren't atheists. They accepted God. They were Jews. They accepted their scriptures, but they reinterpreted them as, these are myths and stories from a culture from many, many centuries ago, and they have to be taken that way. You can't take them literally. So acceptance. Reject the Haskalah, the Orthodox. Reject. Okay, retrenchment. Say, no, everything is fine. Everything we've done before, it's kept us together as a people. It is the will of God. God tells us to do these things. It's not for us to question. And so we continue to do them. We make them relevant. We don't get rid of them. We make them relevant to now. They're just because it's 1880, what we're doing and believing and teaching now is just as relevant as it was 1,000 years ago. You'd think 1,000 years ago was somehow a different time and people didn't have these questions like, why am I, an 11th century Jew in France, circumcising my babies? People never thought this before. What's so special about the 1800s? We do what we've always been doing. We hold to the tradition. We stay true to Torah, the Orthodox. And then we have the centrists, kind of middle of the road, called conservative. And I give conservative because yeah, that seems to be what's commonly used, but it can be misinterpreted as a political statement, and it's not a political statement at all. It means conserving, keeping together what's important, but agreeing with, say, the Reform Jews that what is time bound, what is not working and hasn't worked for a long time, needs to be just gotten away from, get rid of it. So, for example, we keep the Hebrew in our synagogue services. We accept that the scriptures are somehow the word of God in some way, still a revelation, not just human myths. But, the strictures of the rabbis about what women can do in the synagogue and what positions they might be able to take, like a rabbi or something, or not take. Maybe those are time-bound issues that need to be gotten rid of and just kind of put away. Right? So the conservatives are a more centrist response to the Haskalah. There he is, baby. We're not praising the Holocaust and the state of Israel in 15 minutes or 10 minutes. But I would like to finish with this gentleman who brings us up to the end of the modern period for Judaism. Well, near the end, because it goes to 1948. Theodor Herzl. This is, again, a response, but it's not a religious response. This is a political response to the Haskalah. Even for Reform Jews, even by making changes, the Jews making changes, and okay, you have Jews who are just Jews as an ethnicity. They don't get the men don't get circumcised. They don't eat kosher. Maybe they don't even go to the synagogue. They're not believers. But European society and a lot of other places still saw them as Jews. Didn't care whether you were practicing or not. You were a Jew. So there was that anti-Semitic hatred and bigotry. Well, what to do? What can we do? Even when we try to integrate into European society, we're still considered second class or put on the outside. Maybe we just need to go somewhere else. Notice I didn't say go home. Go somewhere else. Go somewhere else where we can be Jews and be left alone. And that's kind of the idea behind this movement, which develops called Zionism, eventually called Zionism. But this man, Theodor Herzl, you can see his dates there. He has this idea that we need a homeland for Jews. And in the beginning, he doesn't care where, just someplace where Jews can live without discrimination. And he founds a group to look into that. Some places are suggested. Uganda in Africa. Argentina, actually that's the place that Herzl favored, going all the way down to Argentina in the southern hemisphere. But eventually Herzl finds out that the members of his group, and I guess a lot of Jews he was talking to, and when he got feedback from his fellow Jews, realized that Israel was the place that their heart desired. That was their true homeland and that they wanted to return to. His idea was nationalistic political. It was not religious in the beginning. Okay, it was a nationalistic goal, but it does eventually come to have religious overtones. So this movement that he kind of starts is called Zionism, after the word, a Hebrew word, Zion, for the city of Jerusalem. Jerusalem. Okay, so remember that Zion equals Jerusalem. That's what Zionism is about. It's not Israel per se, it's the city of Jerusalem. Why? Because that was the center of the Davidic kingdom. And so there's the belief that that's the place we really need to go back to. The popes, I was just reading an article that some student wrote. It was actually quite good. Well, I should say actually quite good. It was quite good. About this relationship between Herzl and the Vatican, because Herzl actually tried to get some support from the Pope at the time, who was a saintly man, but not very loving towards the Jews, because again, this was Pope St. Pius X, and when Herzl went to meet, the response was basically, the same thing that the Jews got with, or the same kind of treatment the Jews got with when the Roman Emperor became a Christian. Well, you don't accept the Christ, So there's a negative view there, and that was kind of the tack that Pope Pius took. He said, well, we really can't support your going back to the Holy Land because it's the Holy Land because the Christ appeared there. Since you don't accept Jesus as the Christ, you don't deserve to go back. That, I mean, and this is a guy, as far as I know, he's an Italian, a Gentile telling a Jew, you can't go back to your homeland. To me, it's just, it sounds bad. I an outsider, am telling the Jews they can't go home because they don't accept their fellow Jew, Jesus, as their Messiah. It's like, dude, you're from Italy. You're not a Jew by blood. But that was kind of the response. We can't seem to support it because it might seem to be showing that we accept your rejection of Jesus as the Messiah. So, anyways, enough said on that. Okay. God bless you all. I'll see you next week. Okay. La da 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 dee. La da da dee da da da. Dooby dooby doo doo. Yes, sir.
Can I choose the church I'm going to? Because I emailed the guy who responded.
Okay. And where were you gonna go?
The one in Scranton.
The one. So Scranton's a small city, and there are a lot of churches. It's called the city of churches, isn't it?
I forgot the exact name, but can I go to one here in Dallas?
Okay, hold on. Oh, because I have this here, Mr. Honey. Take my eyeglasses off. Let's see. Honey agua. Okay, yeah. Well, it says here you wanted to go to the Hindu temple. So that's where you want to go to, right?
Not anymore because the person didn't respond. So can I go to one closer in Dallas?
Go to one what? A Hindu temple?
No, just a different religion.
Okay, well, you're Catholic, so it cannot be a Christian place.
It's not a Christian one.
So what place are you thinking of?
It was the one, the Jehovah's Witness. It was.
Oh, the Mormons, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints?
Yeah, I think that's the one.
And that would be quite interesting. I mean, they consider themselves Christians. The Catholic Church does not. That's why I include them. But they consider themselves Christians. But they're very different from Christianity. So it might be an interesting experience. So yeah, that's fine. I would say just send me an email so I can just make a correction here for you, please.
Thank you.
You're welcome, sir. Okay. La da 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 da. Dooby dooby doo. Da 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 da.